Avengers, the 2020 video game spoiler-free review. So, yes, I got this game right before it was delisted from the Steam store, and I think also the other digital stores. You know, let's see, I don't know, 6 months, more than 6 months ago, a year ago, whatever. So, I know, that does bring up the obvious, why am I doing a review now? Like, I realize, obviously, it is very rare for me to be this close to having a video game review out that is actually relevant. I did go back and forth on whether or not how much detail I was gonna go into, but yeah, ended up deciding however much this one, which will in part depend on physical pain. The physical pain is also why I did not play the, what's it called? The co-op, and why it might be a while after this before I get to another video game review. So, let's see. Yeah, the game has something that I've been missing in the MCU itself, the potent social commentary about minorities. The X-Men movies do this well after this game came out. The Ms. Marvel show did it, let's see, and in each of these cases it's by having at least one character that has superpowers treated by the government as automatically dangerous with some actual police state type stuff. There is tremendous linearity to a lot of the levels. It has fairly limited gameplay. You're usually doing one of the following for a while, then I'll switch for one of the others. Maybe you're fighting a group of enemies in a closed-off location until you've finished all the enemies, then you'll move on to another close location, more enemies, rinse and repeat. You're moving from point A to point B. There's maybe some jumping mild parkour. I hesitate to call any of it jumping puzzles. There's a little bit, but yeah, it's rarely quite challenging or detailed enough to refer to that. Like, it reminded me somewhat of the first 5 Assassin's Creed games. That's, Assassin's Creed 1 through 5. But without the freedom, the expansive levels, the thrill and satisfaction of being able to climb something that's really tall, something that requires you to move around. I don't think this game needed to match, much less top, Assassin's Creed, but then I think it's fair to compare when it intentionally goes in that direction. Like, there's plenty of games that don't remind me at all of Assassin's Creed. I get wanting to break up the fighting. I think it could have been done in a different way. Another thing you'll sometimes be doing is simply walking around an area. Maybe there's something for you to activate in order to proceed. One definite major draw for the game is that it does let you do almost anything and everything that we see the core Avengers team, as established in the first Avengers movie, do in one of the movies. You get to throw Captain America's shield, watch it ricochet. You can even choose who it'll ricochet between. You get to throw Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. You can choose when to retrieve it by willpower. Iron Man can do cool stuff with the suit. Both of the last mentioned can fly. You get to place Tony Stark with first partial, not very long, let's see, not long after Barry Bones' Iron Man suit. Work your way towards getting a proper suit. Black Widow has the dual handguns and moves. Early in the game, she latches onto someone who's flying around. Hulk can grab an enemy, smack him into other enemies, throw him away. There are times where he's running through a claustrophobic area. Some of the time you're controlling him, other times you're controlling the person he's running after. There's action on top of the helicarrier as it is being attacked, potentially broken to the point where it might crash. There's conflict between Tony and Bruce. And some of the additional characters, let's see, you have T'Challa, Clint Barton, Bucky Barnes as the Winter Soldier. And yeah, the playable characters have alternate costumes from, some of these have had very long runs in the comics, so there's a lot. And ultimately, I do think at least a little too many of the characters play a little too similarly, which might be in order for co-op to work. Like, obviously, you're not gonna, there's going to be certain things that you can't really do in this. Ant-Man appears, but you're not controlling him because the shrinking and growing with as much freedom as we see in his MCU appearances, how is that going to work with co-op? That would basically have to be its own separate thing. And let's see. Yeah, in what may be a bid to avoid being called just for normies, it does also go outside the MCU. One of the playable characters is Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel. She's actually the first person you get to play as, and you control her several parts of the campaign. You know, she's the kind of character you either love or hate. I'm not sure there's much middle ground. I personally love her. I'm thrilled she's in this game. And let's see, you know, for a lot of it, it does try to appeal primarily to MCU fans with the rest of the lineup. And let's see, yeah, really, there was almost no one playable in the PC version that wasn't in the MCU by the time the game came out. Really, Kamala Khan and the Mighty Thor and Kate Bishop are the only ones, when in the comics there's tons of Avengers that would be really cool to see. And it is also, you know, the game does... This would be a different review if this game had been more popular, because as far as I understand, they were intending to add more additional characters. You know, as it is on PC, there's 3 additional campaigns and I would say 4 additional playable characters in addition to, you know, if you bought it on release date. And yeah, they intended to keep adding, and certainly I could see how they could have added some really cool ones later. And let's see, and yeah, right. This video will have some spoilers for the spoilers for the MCU leading up to when this game first came out. It is unfortunate the game came out after some of the most prominent characters in this game were no longer in the MCU, which obviously takes some of the appeal out of it, and again means that it would have made more sense to go with characters from the comics, not in the movies. And let's see. Yeah, I meant to say this at the start. I largely love this game. I come fairly close to just outright loving it, but there's a couple of things. Now, yeah, the co-op doesn't sound like it's as strong of an experience as some of the games that I consider to be some of the very best co-op experiences I've had. Commandos 2, X-Men Legends 2, Ultimate Alliance 1, Left 4 Dead 1 and 2, and let's see, Contagion. You know, these are games where the players have to work carefully together to make up for each other. You have to work as a unit in order to succeed, and at least some of the time, it does depend on, you know, once you get to a certain level of difficulty, you will have to play, you know, yeah, work carefully together in this, but yeah. And let's see, yeah, and yeah, you know, 4 people can play the same area of the same level at the same time. And, you know, some of the time it's a good idea to split up, some of the time it can be a good idea to stick together. You know, it's, they'll make sure that there's different parts in some levels where, yeah, you know, there might be 3 different, or even possibly even more, I forget, but at least 3 different places that might all require attention, and you can decide whether, you know, the 4 of you team up and do those one at a time, or if you split up and go to different ones at the same time. And let's see, then we have the... Yeah, parts of it definitely don't feel as much like it was made, like it was always made for 4-player co-op, so much as they knew that that would draw in a crowd that wouldn't be as interested in single player. Now, let's see, the melee fighting, right, I should say, you know, it is especially about melee fighting. There is, you know, every character has ranged attack, but the ranged attacks are not, see, at first I thought, okay, so apparently this isn't the case for all of them, but for some characters, if you just keep using ranged attacks, possibly for all, you will eventually run out of this, like, energy bar, and then you'll have to replenish it, most likely by melee fighting, you know. So it definitely does want you to focus on melee fighting most of the time. But yeah, the melee fighting uses stuff that I've seen elsewhere. Basically, you can. There's a function called counter. It isn't always a direct, like, yeah, it varies from between the playable characters, but other than that, there's quick attacks that don't do a lot of damage, and they can be blocked, but they can also be chained. Heavy attacks, which can break blocks, do more damage, but are also slower. So your opponent can stop the heavy attack in progress with a quick attack, and yeah, it can work really well if you're able to carry out several attacks in a row, if you do multiple quick attacks and finish off either with a final quick attack or a heavy attack that will do more damage. Then if you don't do these combos, enemies can also do combos, and every so often there are attacks that it makes the most sense to simply dodge entirely. There's a function for that. You very quickly get the hang of this sort of system. It's easy to remember, easy to get back into if you take a break for a while. This stands in stark contrast to a lot of tournament fighting games. I realize these games have a different appeal. What I'm saying is I'm glad that they're each doing it their own way. I think these approaches work well for these individual games and genres, and the one-size-fits-all approach would just be frustrating. There's some really cool boss fights that have multiple stages, like old school, but they actually make it clear what zones to avoid, and they make it work both when you're alone facing one and when there's multiple of you fighting it. And Hank Pym does make at least one appearance and shrinks at least one thing. So I think I will talk some about the... Yes. I thought they did a really solid job. I've already mentioned the comment on bigotry, and I don't think that it's accidental that this came out during Trump's first term, or at the, I suppose, yeah, at the very tail end, or was meant to, or not that I'm not saying the Democrats are like perfect, but they're substantially better, and it is the conservatives who pulled America so far right. But yeah, there's parts where you, as Kamala, have to hide from forces that suspect her as dangerous just because she has superpowers, and it's not accidental that they chose the Muslim character, the immigrant, who we know is like she's a very pure, good person, but all they see is her, how she's different. They don't see how she's good. And yeah, have to hide from those forces, have to flee from them, stuff like that. This features, I want to say they're called the Purifiers, basically a human gang that are seeking to eradicate the, and yeah. Given that it's Kamala Khan, it probably won't surprise you to know, they're targeting Inhumans. And that is also something where I feel like, I realize they're from the comics, I'm not saying that, but I feel like the developers sat down and thought, okay, we got to comment on, illegal aliens, what's something from Marvel Comics that sounds like, so, okay, Inhumans, and it might also be, and I really, the Inhumans were a big thing in some of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and they even got their own terrible spin-off show, 8 episodes that are an eternity long each. Now, I think one of the big things is the fact that I think it's very clear that they were very heavily focused on the combat. Like, it feels like they felt that if they could nail the combat, then that would be like the main thing. Right, I do also want to note, I really didn't do any grinding in this. I basically just played as far as, I tried to play every level at least once, to completion if at all possible. Let's see, I think the last 2 of the additional campaigns, I got stuck on the final level, and I did a little research, found out other people got stuck. It's You know, they're difficult. I find them difficult. I'm not you know, as much I'm out of practice, I think is the term. Is in practice a thing? Anyway, yeah, you know, ultimately, every time I got a choice, I played as Iron Man, ended up getting him to level 43, so that the remaining levels require at least level 50. Realized I would have to grind, did a little checking, found out I would have to grind supposedly for at least 5 hours within about a week, which right now is just not tenable with my wrists the way they are. So, yeah, you know, haven't completed the levels that require a minimum of 50, and I didn't really go for the grindy timed, you know, yeah, limited time ones. But yeah, the fighting is definitely where they put their efforts, and I do think that it largely paid off, and I appreciate, you know, they did make sure, you know, overall there's 10 characters total in the PC version, playable characters, and you really, no two of them play exactly the same, you know, despite the fact that both Thors, you know, for short, Mighty and Odinson, both of them use Mjolnir, but, you know, Odinson tends to hang on to the hammer as you're doing melee fighting, whereas Mighty will throw it just a, you know, small distance, which, yeah, you know, both of those are slightly different. You know, that means that she does have to wait, not terribly long, but, you know, it might be like less than a second a lot of the time, but she does have to wait for the hammer to return, whereas Odinson can just immediately hit the next person, you know. But throwing it does also, I believe, do at least a little bit more damage, so, you know, there's stuff like that. And, you know, yeah, both Hawkeyes, Clint and Kate for short, you know, both of them use, you know, they both have trick arrows, but they have slightly different trick arrows, and both of them use swords, and the swords function slightly differently, you know, so yeah, stuff like that. Now, I think one of the things is the fact that at the end of the day, the fighting is perhaps a tiny bit too, it's not complex, but it's not quite complex enough, I would argue. It does end up getting repetitive. Now, like, I wouldn't really say that I was bothered so much as, right, and yeah, since I bought this on sale, nothing critical I'm saying is out of bitterness or something. I feel like I very much got my money's worth. Let's see, I played for 42, almost 43 entire hours. You know, I got a great deal. It was very, very heavily discounted right before being delisted. I'm really, really thrilled that I did see that it was on the store on, you know, at a great discount. You know, I've been wanting it since I first heard they were making it, you know, and it's the kind of game that I've been wanting to, you know, wanting to exist and wanting to get to play since 2008 when the first Iron Man came out, you know. Yeah, the licensed video game for the original Iron Man, I played that on the Wii. It was pretty good. There's a lot to like there, but this definitely does beat it. Anyway, yeah, you know, at the end of the day, like, I can imagine that co-op might, you know, make it more, you know, yeah, increase the addictiveness of the gameplay even more. Personally, I don't really see myself replaying anything that I've already played in this game. I'm not gonna lie, when I started playing it, you know, I honestly did think that they were going to make sure that they would keep being new levels with, you know, story, so you don't have to replay, so you don't have to grind, until at the very least one of the characters was maxed out. Like I said, I got Iron Man to level 43. I read that you have to get past like level 100. So even playing every non-timed level that I have access to at least once, and playing as Iron Man whenever I could, I only got him to 43, less than halfway there, you know, and I believe it's one of those where the further you get, the more experience points you have to get in order to get to the next level. So it's technically not that I'm even almost halfway, having completed the, and I read, this might be inaccurate, but I saw somewhere that apparently if you replay the entire main campaign, you'll have to restart, like reset level. I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I just wanted to note, just in case you're thinking about it, maybe look into it before you reset your campaign progress. And also, like, at the end of the day, it wouldn't do a huge amount for Tony himself, given that there are, so, we have the main campaign features 5 of the main Avengers, not Clint, but the other 5. Wow. And also Kamala Khan. Given the length, which I'm not gonna get into all the, there's stuff about this game you could look up yourself. If I say everything, it'll take forever. Given the length, it is understandable that they just can't give every single one of them a lot. Like, I think they did a great, I wouldn't say that any of them just, like, didn't get enough, though it did feel like there were some that did kind of disappear a little bit, and I think they were hoping that it would make up for it, that they would get you so hooked on playing as that character that you would grind as that character and then not notice that they're not, but I would definitely say for a chunk of it, Kamala is the protagonist, and I think that really works because, like in the comics and in her solo show, she is she's a super fan of the characters. It just so happens that to her, they're, like, real, they're not fictional, but it works well as this kind of, and there's a bit early on where she's, like, discriminated against for being a girl who's into superheroes. And, obviously it hits, it's even more, like, resonant for, girls and women and, Muslim, non-whites, yeah, and such. It is the kind of thing that works for, anyone who cares about comics. Like, we've all at least once had someone, like, say that there was something wrong with our interest in comics, not necessarily gatekeepy like it is here, but yeah, so that works well. And, she believes in them the way that the game intends for us to believe in them. And honestly, if you're intentionally playing this game, if it's not just, like, for a review or something, yeah, you probably do care about these characters. And it is the thing of, like, I think they also realized that, at this point, like, for example, the tech billionaire going out there and saving the world, that just doesn't play the same today that it used to, that, like, yeah, I mean, there's so many examples, Musk buying Twitter and running it into the ground, you have Jeff Bezos, well, yeah, I suppose, really, is there a single tech billionaire that doesn't abuse his workers? So, it plays different. You have to build to it. You have to, underline, no, these really are heroes. They are doing the right thing. And I do appreciate that the villains are this corporation, and the corporation has a lot of influence over the government, and that's how we get the anti-inhuman, laws and such. So underlining that a lot of the time, not all of it, but a lot of the time, when the American government does something bad, it's because of corporate influence, money and politics, and it is up to individuals with a strong moral compass to band together and fight back against that. We can't. So, and obviously, because it's a video game with playable characters, it's, these 6 people and more in the additional campaigns and such, rather than, enough people to vote, the most corrupt of them out of office. Now, yeah, the one of the things here is that, let's see, I think you spend maybe 10 to 20 minutes at the very start of this, just getting into the world, just, going around being a super fan with Kamala. She's looking for comic books. She's talking to, she actually gets to encounter at least some of the core Avengers and briefly talk, and she, like, says something that Thor thinks is wise, that it's such a cool thing. Obviously, if you're a fan, you're really gonna love these interactions, and that does come up later when there's a disaster. The Avengers are held responsible, and they disband, and then you as Kamala have to go around. Crap, am I mispronouncing? I seriously don't mean to be. I guess I should probably just go with Ms. Marvel. I understand that it is that thing, like, it's because the way you pronounce Kamala Harris's first name and Kamala Khan's is slightly different. I swear I mean no disrespect. Not at all trying to make fun of a minority's name here. Ms. Marvel has to go around, finding the members of the Avengers so that they can team back up and stop AIM. And this both allows the game to spend a while, you feel like you've earned access to the various Avengers members as you go through the core campaign, and it's a way for they don't really want to spend that much time and effort on the main campaign only for people to just be like, I don't really want to, you can unlock all of them. That's how I got access to, because the Winter Soldier is apparently someone you unlock at a very high level, like a 110 minimum requirement level, so power level. Anyway, I did play briefly as every single one of them, but yeah, you feel like you've earned access to the character, and there's something really meaningful the first time that you see them again. But after these initial 10 to 20 minutes, the disaster starts happening, and then over the next maybe 20 or 30 minutes, you play as each of the 5 core Avengers that are in the main campaign each. And then there's a while where you're playing as Kamala until you gradually get access to the other ones. And I definitely do think I understand why they did it, because it is this thing of, like, again, like, if you within that time find, okay, I gotta play more as that character, you're either going to play a lot of the campaign until you unlock them, or you're just going to go for the thing that unlocks. But either way, you're going to be playing the game a lot because you want to keep playing as that character. And I don't think that it was too little. At first, I worried a little that it was going to be. There was one part where it, like, cut away from the character, and I was like, already? And then it cut back, and I was still playing as that character. It was like a cutscene or something, But it does mean that an hour into this game, you have tried almost everything that the game has to offer. Not absolutely everything, but there are some things that you unlock later on that definitely change how you play. But a lot of the core attacks are going to be available from the very start of you playing as these characters, and yeah, like, I think that the game would have really benefited from more different ways of interacting with the game and less grinding. I don't mind very similar gameplay so much as long as there's, like, story and character, because that is a major part of it. Like, if I just want something where I punch people, like, yeah, I'll play a fighting tournament game instead. I'm not saying that those have nothing in that direction, but this does have more, And yeah, I think this is a good time to just briefly. So yeah, 100%. To be clear, I don't regret any of the time I spent playing this, and if it wasn't so grindy, I would almost definitely try to max out at least one of the characters. Very likely it would continue being Iron Man. And I'm not ruling out 100% playing, maybe if months from now, if my wrists are much, much better, maybe I will try at least once to grind a character to yeah, and some co-op and stuff like that. But yeah, okay, so there's two different things two different directions. I think I will start with the grinding. So I am not going to pretend like this is the only game that does grinding. Is far from the worst game that does grinding. There's games where the gameplay loop is so repetitive that it it all comes down to just grinding. There's a lot I love about Evolva, but I'm not going to pretend like that isn't very, very repetitive. Like in that game, they were definitely banking on people falling in love with the mutation element, and to be fair, that is great. There's a few levels where they do get like super creative and do something really fun and interesting, but a lot of the time, it's the very same thing over and over. Here they do a much better job. As a brief, I already mentioned. Sometimes there's multiple like things that you have to deal with, and if it's co-op, maybe you'll stick together and be really effective at each place and then move from place to place, or maybe you'll split up. So like sometimes you have to defend, sometimes you have to destroy certain things that are marked very easy to find via the HUD. Sometimes there are a number of characters in a level that are marked easily on the HUD. Sometimes you have to take them out. Sometimes you have to protect them. This has, I would say, the least frustrating escort missions that I think I've ever encountered in a video game. They really realize, okay, people are going to get so frustrated if these are not made, so I really appreciate that. And let's see. There's various, so it doesn't feel like every level is just the exact same thing. At the very, very start, I did worry a little bit it was going to be, especially with how linear so many of the levels are. And this is one of those games that goes for levels that are linear, but then also very focused, and the graphics are fantastic, rather than trying to make you be able to go everywhere and do almost anything at any time. But the graphics are, they're okay, but they're not quite as good, And I understand that, and I certainly do think, open world and co-op, I'm not sure I've played. I mean, I suppose the closest is probably Dead Island that I've played, but in that one, like, they call it open world, but a lot of the time it is fairly linear, which I believe is in part to accommodate for, co-op. Like, just compare, some of the Assassin's Creed games that I've played do have multiplayer, but it's a very different, the levels are very different from the main game world, for that. I think that does, I'm not claiming this is the only game that has grind. I'm saying I think it's too bad that grind is necessary to max out even one of these characters. Like, I could maybe understand if they eventually ran out. I get not being able to make, that's another thing, like making this many, giving you 10 playable characters and then having them start at level 1 and end at more than level 100, Yeah, like, if you're gonna do that, you either have to make the game very, very long, or, make you, rise through the levels much, much faster than you do here. And I would argue that, forget argue. This is the only game I even come close to loving, and I do love a lot about it, where you you can upgrade a lot of stuff, but past a certain point, you're just gonna have to grind if you don't want to miss out. Because, you know, us gamers, we really don't want to miss out. You know, we paid for this. Even if we got it on sale, it's there. You know, we really want to unlock it. And yeah, the fact that you do... Because, see, I mentioned that there, you know, you could make your game really, really long so that so that, you know, by the time you get to the end of it, you'll have gotten a lot, you know, rather than only like halfway or a third of the way or something. Deus Ex, you know, maybe especially the first one. Well, no, I mean the third one as well. I honestly don't even remember about the second one. I haven't played the fourth one yet. I would really, really love to. I do own it. You know, it's down to my wrists, really. I can't believe I'm blanking on the name. Septerra Core, Legacy of the Creator. You know, which is also a game that does a really good job of making you wait a little bit longer before you've tried everything. Because, yeah, sure, the combat... You know, you get to engage in combat just a few minutes in, and you get your first magic card, and are able to use it, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 minutes in, but you won't be able to start combining cards for a little longer, and by the time you've got all the different cards and can make all the different combinations, you are a lot of hours into the game, you know. I suppose System Shock 2, at least once you know what you're doing and what you want to upgrade, isn't necessarily an extremely long game, but I think that one, like Deus Ex, especially the first one, you know, the fact that you can't unlock absolutely everything, which essentially, if you play this game for long enough, as far as I've been able to tell, you can unlock everything. It's just going to take you a lot of hours to get there. You know, if you want to try everything in System Shock 2 or Deus Ex 1, you do actually have to play all the way through the campaign multiple times. Like in Deus Ex 1, you straight up, every time you choose to have an augmentation installed, you are making a choice between two different options. And, you know, I probably mentioned this too much, so I'm not going to spend forever on it, but, you know, one example is the augmentation for your feet can make you run really, really fast, or run without making a sound. Those hugely impact how you play the game, you know, and every augmentation is like that. There's, you know, you over the course of the game, you find 10 different ones, you know. That's the kind of thing that can make you really feel like you're getting your money's worth, and also because they change how you play the game. The way you play Deus Ex 1 in the first hour is incredibly different from how you play hour 5 through 6, for example. You know, once you start getting, you know, the very first augmentation you get fairly early, but once you start getting, you know, some of the other augmentations, it changes how you play, and that just never really happens here. Like, essentially, if something in this changes how you play, it's because you chose to focus on, you know, a different character or something. And like I mentioned, they don't play that differently. You know, this is very much a game that is geared towards, you know, you can sit down with a bunch of people and together just, you know, just pick up a controller each. You can play for 5 minutes and feel like you've gotten something out of it. You can play for 5 hours and still be addicted to the gameplay, you know, and that's what they're going for. They're scared because there's so much competition. You know, I'm glad that we have such diversity in games today. Like, you know, pretty much anything you want, you can find a game that has at least some of that, you know, with almost no exceptions. But it does mean that some of these really big games that are long, you know, yeah, if they don't hook you right away, you might just go for something else, you know. And now that, you know, I hardly ever refund or seek refunds, but I understand that if you know, if you play, what was it, like, I feel like I've heard half an hour, if you've played less than half an hour and you just aren't hooked, you can just refund the game. You know, they don't want people to do that lot. That's part of why they let you play as every character within those first, yeah, more or less within the first 30 minutes. And let's see. Yeah, you know, I mean, I'll grant that if you wanted to max out, I guess even one character, in X-Men Legends 2, yeah, you would have to grind or play all the way through the entire game more than once. But that's, perhaps also the thing, if you play through the entire that yeah, right. One thing is that if you really focus on just one character, you will be able to get that one character really, really high up by the time you complete the game. So you won't feel like you absolutely have to. And the first time you complete that game, you unlock an additional playable character. And if there's certain things where if you find each instance of a certain item, that can unlock a character. But by the time you've unlocked them, the game's almost over, so maybe you'll want to play again. And because they play just different enough, and you can always, like, even if that one character isn't quite enough to make you like really, really hyped about playing the entire game again, there's always a team in that game. There's always 4 characters running around. You can choose all 4, and if you have 3 friends who will play with you, you can, yeah, it's like that. And it also helps that in that, there's, let's see, if one character uses their telekinesis to throw an enemy at another, at one of your allies, and that ally attacks that character, you get like a bonus. You can, have fun with that, and yeah. I think that does cover it for that. Yeah, I think, right, then you have games where, like the first 2 Arkham games, Asylum and City. I do own, let's see, Origins and Night. I might have mixed up the order. I will play them eventually. I certainly hope I will be able to. Anyway, but yeah, in those, once you played all the way through, yeah, you have access to every gadget. So it's stuff like that just, yeah. And I do think that if there was more to do that was very, very distinctly different, that would also really help this game, because at the end of the day, like, yeah, there's the kind of meh movement, which, I mean, I appreciate there's no part of the game where it just feels like, oh wow, we're spending forever just traversing, throw an enemy at me. No, eventually, or there'll be something compelling, like atmosphere-wise. There's some levels where you spend a long time just walking, but it's like, oh wow, what happened here? What exactly is going on? That kind of thing. The game never lost my interest, but I'm sure it would if I did try to grind. And yeah, there's the traversal and the combat, and I do appreciate that the combat, you can play in, I think it's called the Harm Room, which is basically a simulator, and I ended up not really trying because I'm more interested in the story. I think if the fighting, no, anyway, moving on. As far as I understand, you can program that, like, with a lot of variety, and I believe you can even play co-op in it. So, I'm not really saying that they needed to do anything there, but the traversal, I think it would have been fun if they made, like, simulation levels where the traversal was more difficult, and maybe, yeah, there could be some reward if you do especially well. This is something the 2007 tie-in game TMNT did rather well. It's been so many years since I played, but I believe they did it. They both had some where it's fighting and some where it's traversal, or maybe there was some that had both. Anyway, something like that. That's also a game where if you play through it just once, you will have access to basically everything. To everything. And, then you might play it again to get some collectibles to max out. Anyway, but other than that, the only thing you have in this is the store and yeah, you can buy stuff that improves, yeah. And I ended up not doing that an awful lot because it actually isn't. There was a glitch. The game is almost glitch free by now, which I kind of wish this was still on the storefront. But I guess if this sounds appealing, maybe you can try to trade it with someone who. Anyway, I ran into almost no glitches. Basically, just yeah. Yeah, very very little, and certainly not. But yeah, but I did run into a glitch with the store that meant that I lost some of the stuff that I had bought, so I didn't really go for more store stuff. But yeah, you can walk around the various, there's mission hubs, I think they're called, and over the course of the game you get access to different ones. It's not a huge surprise that the helicarrier is one of them, but T'Challa's an additional character. Yeah, you get to visit Wakanda. You get to walk around. I actually, the let's see, it has the throne room. I guess it's like the headquarters. Let's go with that. Yeah, you can walk around as various characters. You can have those various characters talk to characters in these mission hubs and get responses based on the character it is. Yeah, there's fun stuff on the helicarrier. If you go to Thor's room, you can try to pick up Mjolnir. There's fun stuff, but there's not that much of it overall. And I do think that just a little bit of like side content would have gone a very long way. I'm not saying this could have been any of the following games, or should have, and certainly not more than one of the following games, but yeah, like several of the Grand Theft Auto games, in addition to just doing the stuff you need to do to complete the game, there's other stuff. Vice City, you're going around like buying apartment buildings, which gives you something to spend with the, from what I recall, you actually end up with, like, if you play Grand Theft Auto 3, if by the time you've reached the end of it, you can be sitting on a ridiculous amount of cash and not really have much to spend it on. And so with Vice City, they gave you that option. Yeah, maybe they could make something. I'm not asking for something truly open world, but like give you a part of New York, for example, and maybe you're going around, you are restoring buildings and thus restoring, trust in the Avengers, something like that. If it's the thing with Black Widow at one point is like on top of someone who's flying. I wish they had brought that back somewhere. It's possible it's in some of the levels that I just didn't get to, but yeah, I do think. And let's see, something like Splinter Cell Blacklist. You basically, like, if you want the toughest play style to really excel at is the one that gives you the least points or the least money to buy more weapons with, is the one where you're going around just being loud and attacking everyone on sight and stuff like that. And basically, if it might be difficult to get all the way through that one if you never try one of the other playstyles, which is, I think, also something they do to make you try one of the playstyles. Although there are specific levels you can only complete as Ghost, at least. But the campaign itself is so engaging. I always recommend, if you play it all the way through as Ghost, then it'll be easy enough to have enough money to play as Panther next, and then I want to say it's called Action as the third one. And the anyway, in that game, there's you get to control drones, and there's the little drone also, and the multiplayer being very different. This kind of asymmetric multiplayer thing where, yeah, I think they could have done a thing here. I understand it's in at least one of the Arkham games where at least one player is basically like has a very different has very different skills or something like that than the other ones. And yeah, as it is, you basically can only, if you play this with at least one other person, that's another thing, right? The campaign, there's chunks of it where you only control one character. Like there's no, so yeah, that I think the fact that it goes back and forth, and as far I don't think there's really a way that you can just say, okay, now I only want to play the campaign levels that have, I think all of the addition, well, not each of the other campaigns even, but I can imagine there's probably something you can, like a setting where you can just tell it, okay, I want to play with other people, find me a level that I can play with other people. But the fact that the campaign goes back and forth between it, I don't think was necessarily the best idea. And I get how it ended up like that, because there's parts of the story where you really do need to just be one character for that to have any kind of emotional resonance. I don't know. I think maybe if they just had something where maybe two main campaigns, and one of them is entirely solo and one of them is entirely co-op, and like maybe you could make a thing where, once you've reached a certain level in solo, it'll tell you now you can play this mission in co-op, so if you want to play every single co-op level in succession, you'll have to play the other one all the way through. But as it is, like, yeah, I mean, you basically just have to, like, suddenly you get to a mission where you can play with others, and it's like, oh, okay, now I'll invite others. Then you complete that, maybe one or two more, and then you're back to solo, and it's like, okay, do I want to keep playing the campaign that I've been getting into, or do I want to find other multiplayer, like co-op levels or something, That's another thing, like, Splinter Cell Blacklist, yeah, it has, there are co-op levels, but every co-op level, or every level in the main campaign is 100% solo. If you want to play co-op, yeah, find any co-op level and you can play that. You don't have to play through a solo level to then get to play a co-op level and then back to solo. And there's also the multiplayer. I already brought up, Left 4 Dead, and Contagion. In both of those, there's modes where players can fight each other. And I think if this had something where, maybe it could be like a 4-on-1, and the one player controls a boss enemy from, just pick one of the, there's some really cool boss fights. Take one of those. Or maybe 4v4, and, they are just, powerful, fighters for aim, something like that. I do think that they did a really great job over the course of it. Like at the very start, you fight against very basic enemies, and I will say, I think an argument could be made that there certainly are a lot of humanoid. A good chunk of them are robots, but yeah, a lot of humanoid enemies, and it again is this thing of like, well, melee. If every enemy is flying, then melee is going to feel awkward. Or there are some enemies that are really big, but then you use melee against their weak spots, that sort of thing, and yeah, there's some of the special attacks work really well against humanoids. T'Challa can do this thing where he leaps like a cat on someone and like claws at their face. You can really only do that with a humanoid, But at first it's very basic. Over the course of it, you meet more, different enemies with very different attacks. They can have different status effects on you and require different tactics to some extent, at least. And let's see. And I think they did a good job of making some of the characters you wouldn't think could really, stand beside some of these. But, for example, Black Widow is not as physically strong, but she is very fast, and one of her powers is temporary invisibility, which obviously enables her to do a lot of damage in a fairly short amount of time because the enemy can't see her. Where, someone like Hulk, you don't really need to make invisible, he can just smash. Now, I think that does, but yeah, let's see. Maybe also some kind of like competition, more of a competitive element could have helped, to help, yeah, to make the game, like, yeah, um, to keep us playing for longer. I also thought of like for the Wii U, there was this game called Zombie U, where there's a mode where one player controls the human fighting zombies, and the other player, it's almost like this RTS kind of thing where the other player like dispatches zombies to destroy something that the human player has to defend, or something like that. I think that could have, maybe not RTS, but maybe at least like before a level starts, the you have a certain number of resources, and like, I'm not saying, don't let it take forever. Give a player, I don't know, 2 minutes or something to build up like a base or something, and yeah, see, yeah, set the, choose a few really expensive and also powerful enemies and turrets and such, or a lot of less, or somewhere in between, something like that. Just there's a lot they could have done that would have been great. Also, at the end of the day, while I think that they do a good job of having varied places, you'll go to the forest, you'll go to the desert, there's the snowy tundra, there's Wakanda, there's a bunch of different places for the different levels to be set. And yeah, it is of course amazing, running around Wakanda and looking at just the night sky, or looking at the Wakandan buildings and tech and so, just, yeah. But yeah, and over the course of it, there's also like, there's hidden facilities you go inside of and such. I also think at least a little bit more in the way of puzzles could have helped. There was actually one puzzle near the end where I thought, oh, it's going to be a puzzle, and I way overthought it, and I actually spent a while trying to figure it out, and then by the end I was like, oh no, it really is just this, But yeah, there's one part where you go, well, one part. For part of this, you can go to the future. This really post-apocalyptic wasteland. Very, very cool. And there's an older version of at least one character that you're familiar with. Very, very cool. And yeah, there's side missions set in the wasteland, the future wasteland as well. It would have been really cool if you got to leave the planet, and this is one of those things where I could imagine they would have, because it seems like it's, you could just be running around on the surface of another planet, and just say something like, oh, it has atmosphere or something, and like high-tech buildings there instead of high-tech buildings only on Earth. And yeah, if they added Carol Danvers, if she had been one of the additional, and this is not a criticism, I'm saying, if the game had been sufficiently popular for longer, I can imagine they would have added Carol Danvers, who was, her movie made over $1 billion, the first one, and the fact that the second one didn't, yeah, it's not as, yeah, just don't listen to the anti-fandom grifters. They're completely full of it. Anyway, yes, so I could see how she could have taken them to another planet, and you could have had side missions there, and yeah, just, in general, done stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, maybe one side mission, or side activity, maybe you could have gotten to, I'm not saying this could have worked as like one of the main missions, but if the game allowed you to control some of the Ant-Man powers just a little, that could have been an interesting, or maybe it could have been part of a level where, one player has to handle that while the others defend him from waves of enemies, something like that, and yeah, you're giving orders to ants, and doing a heist like an Ant-Man 1, or maybe there's some kind of shrink growth thing, and it's just like, yeah, it would probably have to be like at least slightly separate. I'm not sure how you do fighting with, like, yeah, they do have, Ms. Marvel can embiggen, and it's very cool, but it's not quite the same as like shrinking to giant man size, embiggening to giant man size, or shrinking to the size of an ant, that sort of thing. Now, I think, and maybe also some more like ranged, fighting. I do think that's something that increases the shelf life of some games, like, yeah, something like I got super into the story here, and also in Splinter Cell Blacklist. If I'm playing one of these again, like from the start to the finish of the campaign itself, I think it's more likely that it'll be Splinter Cell Blacklist. And yeah, part of it is, the moment that you give, because, you can be running around with a handgun, with shotgun, assault rifle, sniper, all these different things. And yeah, it really changes how you play. And I do think that they could have made something, maybe something where, there are already ranged attacks for all the playable characters. Give one or two new weapons to at least some of them. I think, it's possible that more would have been unlocked, but by the end of this, I could. There were 3 different for Tony, but the others I think only had 1 each. As like ones you could cycle between. I don't mean the superpowers with the cooldown that, but and you could have a thing of like maybe some enemies are like hiding, and one of the players has to like act as bait, run past to draw them out, and then the other players really quickly try to shoot them or something. Maybe at least as like an optional, sort of an optional thing, because you could have a thing of like, well, if you shoot these enemies, then yeah, like, if you shoot them from afar, you don't have to fight them up close. Something like that. It would really increase replayability. Yeah, I think that might be about it. Yeah, that... Right, I did want to say, I do think that some of the characters, the main campaign, over the course of it, you find the original Avengers. I won't say if you find all of them, because there is at least one where it's left a little bit up in the air. But some you find so close to the end of the main campaign that, yeah, by the time you finally get to play them as them again and unlock them for additional missions, that campaign's almost over. And again, then you're just left with a lot of grinding. And I mean, hypothetically, you could save all the side missions until you've unlocked the character you most want to play. I mean, I suppose in a way, did I do that? I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, I do think that is also slightly frustrating. I personally do think they did a good job on the 3 additional campaigns. So, one focused on Kate Bishop, one focused on Clint, and one focused on Black Panther. And yeah, for each of them, like, it feels like their story. And yeah, there's great character moments for every single character throughout this. And not all the bosses get a lot, but other than that, yeah. Yeah, and it is also one of those things where, once you've completed the main campaign, since there's still gameplay, they can... I was overall happy with how much they resolved the main conflict, but of course they can't 100% resolve it the way that, games that aren't trying to make you keep playing after... Again, System Shock 2, Deus Ex 1, these have endings that, like, I still think about every so often. I'm still like, wow, that was, really something. And then here, it's an ending mostly, but yeah, they're also leaving. And again, that is not unique to this game. Splinter Cell Blacklist has a similar issue. It's the same issue. I think that might just about cover... yeah, I definitely do think that they did a solid job coming up with attacks for all the different characters. Like, clearly they wanted people to feel motivated to play as each of these, and yeah, all of them have some signature move that you've seen in the MCU. You know, Bucky can hold up the metal arm. That's his counter move. You know, if you press the counter button, he'll hold up his arm to block incoming attacks. And yeah, you know, he does use a big gun. He can throw a grenade, though there's a cooldown for it. You know, Black Widow. Let's see. It's been a while since I played. I think it's the sticks, or is it like one? I think it might be a staff. That one of her superpowers, you get temporary use of this staff that's very reminiscent of something she used in the movies. The electrical shock thing, you know, which also makes her really effective. It's, you know, yeah. T'Challa, of course, has the what do they call it again in the movie? They talk about in the first Black Panther the built up force of vibranium or something like that. You know, with the purple, yeah. And let's see, I already mentioned Mjolnir and Tony Stark has the red laser that was introduced in Iron Man 2 and is used, you know, it gets some really cool use in the first Avengers, for example. And, you know, he can also fire that rocket that he uses to blow up a tank in one of the Ultrons. And I think that might... Yeah, the trick arrows, for example, like, holy crap, I really, really enjoyed playing as Clint and Kate, using their trick arrows. That was... Yeah, maybe there should have been more of that, because they really did a good job making... But that's also, it's difficult for some, you know, like, at the end of the day, with Hulk, it is mostly going to be, you know, brute force, but I do really appreciate you can pick someone up and smash them like he does with Loki, and, you know, his ranged attack is like the tank in Left 4 Dead. You know, you pick up, you know, part of the ground you're standing on, and, you know, you're almost always standing on ground, and then you could throw that, but you can also pick up certain enemies and throw them, hurting both of the enemies in one. Yeah. Yeah, personally, I don't think that it's a problem for the game that... I think the fact that it doesn't look and sound exactly like the MCU, I don't think it's a problem. It's clearly not meant to be the same continuity. I do think that it might have been good if they didn't go as close as they do. It does feel a little bit like they're thinking, you know, well, people will only... It's like how, you know, right after a comic book movie comes out, you know, sometimes, I don't know if they still do this, but I remember, you know, in the early 2000s, you know, Spider-Man came out, you know, next time you see a Spider-Man comic, it says, you know, as seen in the movie, and there's like a still from the movie. Same thing with X-Men movies, stuff like that, and they'll start bringing characters into the comics that either were invented for the movies or that we just haven't seen in a while in the comics, you know, to get people to be like, oh, this isn't actually that different from the movie that I enjoyed, you know. And yeah, it does feel a little bit like that. I think it works really well when they go in a different direction. Like, I don't know if they knew... Well, let's see. Now, I think by the time Kate was added to this game, I'm pretty sure they knew this is a very... You know, the MCU Kate is very, very different. You know, when we first meet the MCU Kate, she is... It really is the first time we meet her where... You know, everything Kate Bishop I've read, it's, you know, she's been around for a little while. She's much more confident than when we meet MCU Kate. I can imagine later MCU Kate will be more confident as well. But what I'm saying is, you know, the Kate we got here was very different from the Kate we got around that same time in the MCU on Disney+. So, you know, clearly they were doing some things very different. And this Black Panther is somewhat different, and certainly Black Panther and Steve Rogers sound fairly different. This is a more like, not authoritarian, but authoritative Steve Rogers. And, you know, yeah, the voice they have for T'Challa is also a bit more like dominant, where both characters in their movies, you know, Chadwick Boseman, R.I.P., rest in peace, rest in power. You know, yeah, you know, amazing voice, but there is this sense of like trying to be a good person in addition, and that works really well for a movie. When you're playing a video game, you're playing as someone you think is badass, it works really well. And or he's like giving a briefing or something like that. It works well for the voice to be a bit more intense, and it doesn't get to the point of like, you know, it doesn't feel like this is the Steve Rogers of the Ultimates, you know, the one that, yeah, Lindsay Ellis did an amazing video talking about, you know, the various versions of Steve Rogers, including that one. She does a fantastic job, you know, pointing out the issues there. Yeah, I think that does pretty much. Yeah, I really appreciate that the different characters, you know, at least some of them, what they do with their heavy attack, it doesn't just feel like, oh, it's like the regular attack, just different, you know. It's actually like Steve will use his shield in melee for the heavy attack. Like, let's see, I think basically like, not quite tackle, but like run into someone with the shield, you know, facing towards them. Let's see, T'Challa does like a lunge, you know, yeah, just various. I'm pretty sure Bucky uses his metal arm, you know, stuff like that. I thought that worked quite well. And yeah, I think, yeah, I think the main campaign does, you know, it is one of those things of like, obviously a lot of people didn't want the main storyline to just be, oh, the Avengers have to be reassembled, you know, like, it's not quite like the origin story. That would also be annoying, but it is a story that you feel like, well, you know, do we need to tell the story? And I do think it is the political climate, and also this thing of like making you earn these additional characters, you know. But yeah, like by today, like we no longer really think of. There's a growing attitude, which I 100%, you know, agree with and part of, where like this idea of a really incredible individual solving the problems for the rest of us, while the rest of us just have to sit back and let them do what they do, that is no longer as popular as it once was. And that could be a problem for this, because, you know, superhero media, you know, unless you're subverting expectations, you know, yeah, that is a big part of it. It's you know, it's difficult to do, you know, superhero media that delivers the superhero thrills without at all falling into this thing, because you can't constantly have other people helping out. That's not, you know, it's isn't part of power fantasy. And so yeah, here they have this thing of like, yeah, you know, they with things are worse without them, which is of course also one of those things, like that is something that people who argue in favor of bad things will say. You know, yeah, you know, capitalism is bad, patriarchy is bad, but without it, and, you know, a lot of them don't even bother trying to explain why it would be worse without it. And, you know, additional models have been thought up. There's places around the world where they've been implemented and work rather well. But yeah, yeah, this is a decent time to say. Yes, a communist dictatorship is bad, but so is a capitalist dictatorship. It's the dictatorship. It's not the economic model that's making it bad. And yeah, I think that does cover everything. So it's let's see. Right, this version of Nick Fury is also somewhat different from it. They didn't try to just give us Samuel Jackson, there's a similarity in like he is still, an African American with an eye patch and such, but yeah, they're not trying, the MCU, like in the comic, in the Ultimate Comics, Nick Fury actually is based on Samuel Jackson's appearance, and then he got to play him in the movies. Now, I think that might just about... Yeah, I do think that... No, actually, yeah, that does cover everything. So, yeah, yeah, there's a lot to love, and I do think that they made a lot of smart choices. I would rather that they do this well at the combat, and then deliver these linear levels. That means that the players don't get too far away from each other and such, compared to the alternative. And I do appreciate that there is at least a little bit of traversal, fairly little in the way of like jumping puzzles and such, but yeah, it's not nothing. And I mean, I don't think I'll ever replay Assassin's Creed 1 through 3. I could see myself playing more of this down the line. I wouldn't rule it out, at least. And I do feel like I got a lot out of it. Yeah, that is everything. So I hope you enjoyed watching, as I enjoyed watching, as I enjoyed playing and recording. Wow. See, this is what happens when a long time passes without me doing like a review of one of these bigger games. But yeah, that is all I have to say about that.